We know how much you love talking about player feedback, and we do too. What's up, everybody? This is Let's Talk Customer Feedback, and I'm your host, Natalie. Thanks for listening, and thanks for telling your Player Insights Pro friends about us. This is Season 3, so let's get right into it. The gaming industry expects another booming year in both excitement and sales. But with the launch of many new games comes the realization that the market becomes even more crowded and the bar is raised yet again in all aspects, including games complexity levels, design, story, and character features. So, can leveraging player feedback help with this? Let's find out with today's special guest. How to leverage player feedback to develop the ultimate user experience in games. Welcome to today's Affogatta podcast. Let's talk customer feedback. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Michael Rubinelli, Chief Gaming Officer at Wax Studios, Worldwide Asset Exchange. First, let's say hi to Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm very good. We're super excited to have you here. So before we dive into the player insights and all the questions, let's hear about you. Can you tell us how you got into the industry and where you are today?
How I got into the industry? Well, I got into the industry a little bit ago. I'm not a spring chicken necessarily, but I started my career in electronic arts, kind of ironically in the marketing track, but realized fairly quickly that making games was what I wanted to do. And so I followed my heart, followed my passion, and joined a product development group that made a bunch of really popular sports games. And from there, kind of my career took off. And I've been really lucky to work on great games for a long time, probably a lot of games that your audience has heard of, at a lot of companies hopefully your audience likes. And that's
definitely.
That's how I came up through the ranks and brought me to Wax today.
Well, that's amazing that you understood you wanted to do game designing at EA, the perfect place, right?
It's funny. I always say EA is a great place to start your career or end your career. The middle of your career, not so much, but if you want to start or end your career, EA is a wonderful place to be.
That's awesome. So it was the right place at the right time.
It really was.
So before we start the questions, I would just like to tell a short story to the public. Analyzing player feedback has never been more important. Just like when in 2014, Warner Bros. Was about to release Shadow of Murder, and players discovered that the company requested that all YouTube influencers who wanted pre-release codes would have to provide positive sponsored content for the game, with them, the company, having ultimate control over the material that was going to be published or not published. It's safe to say that once this news got out into the public, people were less than happy about these unethical and restricted business practices, and the game sentiment decreased enormously. So what happened with Warner Bros? Did they really analyze the feedback they were getting? Did they truly understand what was going on in the industry? We don't think so. So with that story in mind, I can't wait to hear what Michael has to say. So let's start with the questions. So can you introduce us now a bit to the role in the company now, and what do you do as a Chief Gaming Officer at Wax?
Yeah, look, it's really kind of an interesting space, the Web3 gaming space. And what's really interesting is the importance of analytics and telemetry, what we call business intelligence, BI, in the gaming space, in terms of informing your decisions. And there's always been forms of kind of metric-based or empirical evidence on whether a game is successful or not. Even when you go back to retail, the early metrics of kind of how many did you pre-sell of a version of something, right? Was an indication of how well your marketing was working. And so there's always been kind of analytical kind of evidence to suggest things are working or not. But with the advent of, business intelligence, it really became kind of the forefront of how do you live operate a game. And it really opened up people's eyes on a production standpoint, from a marketing, from a sales, all these things. So there's a real heavy reliance on analytics to understand what is the sentiment of your product relative to your audience. And I think sometimes it swings too far the other way. People are completely reliant on analytics, and it paralyzes them because there's so many numbers to consume.
Definitely.
But if you know how to look at the data, if you know how to parse it, and you have proper A/B tests set up, and you understand cohort analysis, you can actually get to an optimal point of performance much sooner rather than later. And what's really, really interesting about all that is actually encourage you to take chances, right? Encourage you to do things that you're like, I don't know if this will work or not, but let's see. Like opposed to this has to be perfect. It has to look great. It has to sound great. It has to play great. And then putting something out there, and you spend a lot of time and a lot of money producing content that may or may not be optimal for your audience. So it's really, it's a liberating thing, but you have to know how to use it correctly.
Definitely. And I think that's great that you mentioned that. And I think that what is important, I think that we're going to talk about this later on in the podcast, is also to find the right balance between the quantitative, the metrics, but also the qualitative and what players are saying, right? So I think, yeah, that's actually super relevant as to what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I was going to add, it's really interesting that, content creators, right? Whether you're a movie director or you're a game producer or a game designer, or a chief gaming officer, or chief creative officer, like you have a singular opinion, right? And you have a point of view and you have your instincts, but you're putting out a product to, 10,000 people, 50,000 people, or even 1 million people. There's no understanding that your ideas are the best, right? Or your tastes are other people's tastes. And so you actually don't know. And to assume that you have the best kind of, set of features or paradigm for people to consume is naive and maybe a little bit hubris. And so, like I said before, it's great to put something out and get a signal and understand how your audience operates. And my own personal kind of story in that regard is, when I worked at EA, I worked at Midway, I worked at Capcom, I worked a lot of very kind of blue, if you will, male-oriented games, action, adventure, doing things involved a lot of violence or a lot of sports. And so I got to a company in 2010. I joined a company in 2010 called Playdom. And Playdom and I showed up at Playdom my first day of work. I was really excited. There's 400 people in my org. And I was like, let's go. Let's build some great content. They're like, right, we build games for women over 40 in the Midwest of America. I'm like, what?
I have no experience for this.
Exactly. My whole career had been building things that I love to play, right? So I always had that, I've got my finger on the pulse. I know what the audience wants because it's what I want. And now we're going to this whole new audience, a different cohort, a different mentality, a different session. Like all these things were things that I hadn't had experience with. But you learn really quickly that, again, you can build something that they like, or you get a signal that they like, and then you look at that signal and you interrogate it continually. And then you're like, they do this often. This is what drives them forward. This is what holds them back. This is what causes them to leave. This is what causes them to spend. This is what causes them to be viral. Like all these wonderful things. It's so liberating. And so, again, if you want mass adoption, it really doesn't matter what your personal beliefs are. You have to blend the art of instinct and creativity with the science of empirical evidence and analytics and cohort analysis. And once you have those two things working in concert with one another, you can deliver an unbelievably well-performing product that, has your audience in mind.
Definitely. And as you say, with all of this in mind, you can really reach any audience, even though you are not connected at the beginning with. So exactly. That's actually great.
Yeah.
And Michael, we understand you oversee the development of all internal and external blockchain and play and own games at Wax Gaming Portfolio. Can you tell us more about this and how player feedback influences your decisions?
What's really interesting is that we're really in an emergent space, this Web3 gaming space. And there's this really large, kind of powerful movement that it's sweeping, these corners of the interactive world. And it's all around asset ownership. And if you want to look for a parallel or a paradigm that you can kind of map back to or draw from that I think is really relevant kind of one-to-one is the free-to-play space. And so in 2009, 2010, free-to-play was just something that people whispered, just like, NFTs and, Web3 gaming and play-to-own. And like the really kind of aggressive, I think, smart kind of visionary type people in the world see it the way that we do. But if you go back to 2009, 2010, and again, history is really consistent on kind of these platform transitions and who resists.
The cycles. Yeah.
Not a lot of people believed in free-to-play. They said, this is a terrible idea. Facebook games aren't real games. Like we hear these like NFT games aren't real games. Facebook games aren't real games. Free-to-play mobile isn't, cartridge-based or isn't console-based, isn't disc-based like, PlayStation and or then the Nintendo Wii and, the Xbox, I think 360 back. Like there's like very dismissive, right? Of free-to-play.
Exactly.
Just like today's traditional publishers are very dismissive of Web3 gaming. And so we see these similar parallels that we can map to.
The patterns, yeah.
Right. We know that the winners in the Web3 gaming space are going to be the people who are native in Web3, like Wax and other companies like us. But the thing that's really interesting to me, the thing that's really powerful, the thing that I think that resonates with a player is, I've bought something, it's mine. I bought something, I want to sell it, I want to trade it, I want to keep it, I want to give it away. Like, you now have free will to do that. In traditional gaming, you can't do that still. It's very much this walled garden. And the big publishers and big developers will say, yeah, go ahead, sell your account, we're going to ban you. Go ahead and try to sell this item on eBay, we're going to find you,
right.
Out, we're going to blacklist you. Like, there's all these really...
Very closed. Yeah,
these very draconian things that they have inside of their walled garden because they fear this change that is coming. They don't know how to monetize it. They think it's going to cost them money. It feels like it's taking control away from them or their audience, when in reality, players actually want to own everything that they buy. And of course they do. And so, the things that we do, and again, I know you asked a great question. I'm going to get to it eventually, I promise.
No worries. This is also interesting.
If you believe that players want to own everything that they buy, then the goal for the developer and companies like ours is to figure out what are those experiences. Now that you own something, how does that map to what that interactive core loop is, those progression loops are? Like, how do you take this whole mentality of ownership and, complete control over your assets? And now how do you build that into a game that is sensitive to that and recognizes that? It's a really kind of powerful thing. You combine the idea of ownership with what does that mean for gameplay? And so when you say kind of what games you build and how do you see the world, I first start with the notion of, okay, now that as a player, I can everything. What kind of game do I want to play? Do I want to own a car in a racing game? Do I want to own, a football team in a football game? Do I want to own an axe in an RPG game? When I craft, trade, and sell, like, how are those things mapped to what these player experiences are? And then how do we optimize around that? And so the thing that we've done at Wax is we've taken kind of 5 or 6 different really prominent gaming genres, and we've applied that thinking of ownership to those things, and we're bringing it to the masses. And we're bringing it out not when it's completely done, but when it's close to being done. So again, we can get that signal from the audience. Do you like this? Do you not like that? What resonates with you and what doesn't? And we're kind of live operating to coming out with a full game that really performs unbelievably well relative to their behaviors.
That's actually great because that's like mini sprints, right? You just get feedback and just optimize it, and that way it's a win-win for both yourself and also the players. But where do you gather this feedback from?
Well, we get all kinds of feedback. So we have, as you can imagine, we have a lot of logging events or tagging inside of the game itself. But what you have to do is you have to know what you're looking for, and so. The knee-jerk reaction, the typical response from kind of newer or not very experienced developers is like, oh, let's put, tags on every single thing. Let's collect every single piece of data. Let's do everything. So every single click is mapped to, 10 different things, right? And really that kind of boil the ocean mentality is actually not very healthy. It can actually paralyze you to a certain extent because you have so much data. Right,
so much data.
You get so many people in, and if every single click that they do is attributed to something, then you spend all this time kind of analyzing what does it all mean, and you can get really lost. You can, there's this saying, right? You can't see the forest for the trees, and so what we say is we take a point of view. Okay, here's the let's call it 6 to 10 things that we want to understand tied to retention, engagement, virality, monetization, LTV. And what are the things that ladder up to what those signals are, right? Because that's really the most important thing. Can you get people in? Can you keep them in? And then can you get them to monetize because it helps run your business? And then how do they perform within those kind of those categories?
I think it lost
and
you
so
here
we
for
kind of simplify it to the most important things.
Wait, I'm just gonna click here for. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I completely agree. And at the end of the day, obviously, you need to understand what are players going to like and what players are going to dislike to reduce churn, to increase game economy and all of these important metrics.
Yeah.
So definitely. And what are the top 3 player insights that bring your team the biggest impact?
It's a really good question. It varies from game to game. I think the thing that, and it's really kind of unusual, maybe even counterintuitive, but we actually don't care about retention because what we have found and what you always find, this was true in the free-to-play space, it's true in the Web3 gaming space, is that when players have invested money in buying something, the likelihood that they will stick around is very high, right? Like, I put money in, I'm going to stay. Opposed to free-to-play, I haven't put anything in. Retention, player retention, 3 days, 7 day, 14, 30-day retention. That's much more kind of a powerful metric.
Volatile, yeah.
Yeah, in free-to-play gaming is like, wow, how do I keep them in the game? How do I keep them coming back? The people who have paid, the retention is like through the roof. And so
makes sense, yeah.
So then in free-to-play, the whole idea is, okay, how do I get people from shoppers to spenders, right? In the Web3 space, you start off usually, and like 99 times out of 100, when most of these games that are on Web3, you start off buying an NFT as your way in. So, retention is actually really, really high because players have spent, right? They're committed. They've invested. They've bought assets. They are in. It's not like, and usually it's not like, well, I bought something that was 99 cents. For most NFT based games, it's, I've spent, $10, $20, and sometimes hundreds or thousands of dollars. So the likelihood that you'll retain those players is unbelievably high. So therefore, the need to measure and really kind of increase retention is actually not important in Web3 gaming. So that's kind of one thing that
that's actually very interesting.
Yeah, we kind of know right away. I mean, if you think about it, it's like, a lot of people say in free to play, as a matter of fact, like if you look at Clash Royale or if you look at League of Legends, if you look at Fortnite, wow, I've spent so much money, I can't quit playing now. Like that's literally like, I feel guilty about leaving because I've spent so much, right? And that's actually a really harmful thing in that people are staying in a game they don't enjoy. They're staying because they've spent money. Like, I'm pop committed, as the saying goes. Like, I can't leave now. Like, now in Web3.
Yeah, you're committed for the wrong.
Exactly.
For the wrong reasons.
Yeah. The motivation should be like, I'm staying because I have so much fun and I get to own all my stuff. And so it's like, I can't leave now. I put all this money into it. Like, it's so terrible. Like, you're almost like guilting people into staying. Web3 actually removes that stigma. It's like, hey, yeah, you spent a lot of money, but it's okay because you can also sell all your things later for a certain amount. Now, maybe you don't get your money back and that's okay, but you've subsidized that. It's no longer a total sunk cost.
Yeah, and you own something.
Yeah, so the first insight I would say is not an insight at all. It's like, let's not focus so much on retention because retention is somewhat a given with the amount of money people are spending to get in. The second thing is, and the really kind of, again, I think the thing that I've observed, I think is really important to keep in mind is player onboarding, right? So if you look at Web3 gaming, if you look at kind of what is that, kind of on-ramp to playing, it's filled with a ton of friction. And so if you bring a core gamer in the NFT space, and once upon a time, I was a core gamer and I had never played an NFT game. And so kind of, at some point last year, I started looking into it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go learn all about P2E, right? Play to earn. I'm going to learn all about it. Everybody talks about Axie and this game and that game. I'm a gamer. I'm a businessman. I'm all these things, I want to know. So the first thing I do is I go to a site and I'm like, okay, well, what DApp do I? There was no recommendation engine. Like, okay, well, I'm going to play this one. And then I started playing it and they're like, okay, you have this, 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 and this. I'm like, okay, well, I'm sitting thinking I'm used to all those things just being there in the experience. Like, nope, you have to go to a different site. You have to go to a marketplace. You have to go to a wallet. You have to do this. You have to deposit. You have to buy a cryptocurrency. I was like, oh my God, like
so much to do. Yeah.
Right. No wonder nobody's onboarding into these games. It's just friction everywhere you look. And so one of the things that we measure really, really closely is what does our conversion funnel look like? Like, I've got a user, they're interested in playing our game. Can I get them to actually take a game action from not taking a game action? And normally that sounds really simple, but it's like setting up a wallet has to be easy. Acquiring the assets to play has to be easy. It has to feel very native. It has to feel very much like what they're used to doing on a regular basis. We have to have this high level of contextualization in terms of where they're at, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and really not overwhelm them with too much information. But
right. It sounds like you need to be such a techie person to be able to play something.
Right. And, a lot of times as an industry, as a Web3, like if you go around and you look at all these other companies that are building these games on Web3, they talk to themselves, right? They talk about, block emissions and deflationary measures and wallets and deposits and exchanges and scrapes and fees and all these things that the core gamer's like, I just want to show up and play. You told me this is fun. I'm used to going to the App Store. I download an app for free. 20 20 seconds later, I'm playing it. 60 seconds later, I'm having a blast, and I come back the next day, the next day, the next day. So the thing that's really powerful is we know where they want to go, and we know where we're at, and bridging that gap and analytics tied to things that allow us to see that we're progressing towards that bridging those two moments. Like that's what we look at, and that's what we measure, and that is kind of our path forward. And we have a saying, kind of in the digital halls of wax, is what is in the way becomes the way, right? So wherever we are blocked from reaching that kind of that North Star moment, like that's what we're interrogating, that's what we're trying to remove, and that's what we're trying to progress along. And so we have analytics that look at, our ability to progress players into the game and get them all the way through the conversion funnel.
Wow, that sounds actually super interesting, and it's such a different way of viewing gaming. I'm so used to, as you mentioned, like how to reduce churn, and as you mentioned, the onboarding is pretty simple usually, so it's a whole different level.
Yeah, I tell you, if you've ever tried to set up a MetaMask account, it's like orders of magnitude harder. Like anytime you have to go watch a 12-minute video on YouTube on how to do something that should take 2 clicks. Like, you're
there is something wrong. Yeah.
You're so poorly positioned. And I would think that so many product people looked at kind of MetaMask. It's the gold standard for Ethereum-based wallets. But probably somebody coming to go, this is the worst user journey in the entire history of the world. Like, there's so much low-hanging fruit here. Like, we could take MetaMask to lunch. Like, we could build the de facto standard in wallets and crypto wallets and really kind of build a whole business around that. We've taken that same approach. We haven't built a business around it, but if you look at the Wax Cloud wallet, it's a very Web 2 interface, right? It's like you show up, wax.io, you say, I want to create a wallet. You're like, okay. Do you have Discord ID? Well, of course I do. You have Google Auth? Yes. Do you have Facebook Connect? Yes. Well, you can use any of these things just
connect your wallet to
2 clicks and your wallet is set up, right? It could not be any easier. And that's why with the Wax Cloud wallet, we have 13.3 million accounts created today. And, it's a very, very large footprint because people we know will embrace convenience even when there's security concerns. Like there's a lot of security concerns around, crypto, is it a scam? Am I going to get robbed, socially engineered? It's like all those things are true. But if you just use Facebook Connect, you can set up a wallet in 1 to 2 clicks. And they're like, oh, okay, I'll do that.
And just that small part of Wax, it just really demonstrates the importance of player feedback, right? It really shows how important it is to understand the player and to understand what they're looking for and what they want.
You're right, Natalie. It's everything. Like player convenience, player feedback, user journey. Like if you don't start there, then you're really kind of missing the point. You have to start at the customer and work backwards to your technology. A lot of people say, I built this and I'm going to ram it down your throat until you accept it. In reality, you actually have to start at the player or the consumer or the shopper and work backwards to what you've done.
Exactly.
Like, does your business, do your tools, do your technology, do your product, does it improve the lives of the people that are going to use it? And if the answer is yes, then great. You can do things in service to the player that, it's like, oh, cool. They built this for me with a Web 2 interface. I love that. Thanks, Wax. Like that's opposed to here's our wallet. You better like it.
You better understand. Right. Yeah, definitely. And that's so important. And so now we're talking about you understanding all of this feedback and all of these insights. So what determines how quickly you get to an insight? What usually is like the most time consuming element of that work of actually getting an insight out of all the data that you have?
Yeah, it's so there's a thing in the analytical world called statistical significance, right? Like if you have 10 people do something, that's great, but tell me when you've got 1 million people who've done it, right? Or you've seen this behavior happen 1 million times. And 1 million isn't always the statistical significance. It depends on kind of what you're trying to measure, but in reality, you can have all these logging events go out and them firing correctly and getting attribution and segmented and whatnot and, mapped to visualization tools. But if you don't have anybody using the product, then you don't really get a clear or true signal. And so the thing that I would say is you have to have analytics, but you have to have audience and you have to have adoption. And until you have those things, you can't really understand if something is an insight or not. And so it's not just like, I built this analytical platform. Now I know everything. Well, you don't. You still have to feed users into it. You still have to make sure they're using it. And so I'm not trying to avoid your question. It's more kind of, utilization driven in terms of when is that insight. You could have that insight on day one, you could have it on day 31. It's really going to vary, and it's going to matter on kind of how many people do you have looking at it, and is that enough to get a true indication?
It actually makes sense. And in this conversation also, and in this regard, and talking about insights and data, how do you think player insights in terms of qualitative and quantitative data intertwine?
Well, I think the thing that you really, really have to understand is you have to understand segmentation. And so a lot of times you may get, like, as an example, I'll give you a great example. So our audience today on Blockchain Brawlers is mostly gamblers and speculators. Okay, we know this about them. We know this is how they perform. We know this is what their persona is, right? We know this is how much cryptocurrency they have in their wallet. We know these are the behaviors. They act and they perform as if they are quote unquote investors in a project. They don't perform like gamers necessarily. Now, some people will say they're gamers, but we know their main motivation is this. So we have this persona that says, okay, this is, player demographic one. They live in this area. Here's their socioeconomic status. Here's kind of what motivates them, right? You put them in a bucket and you say, okay, we're going to build things for them because you understand who they are. But that may not be who you ultimately want to build for, right? We want to build for the core gaming audience. And as an example, there's 3 billion gamers in the world. Like, that's a lot. 3 billion.
That's a lot, yeah. Especially after the pandemic, I think it grew immensely.
Right. In the crypto world of NFT owners that have wallets and so forth and so on, as best we can tell, the data's a little bit muddy, but there's about 35 to 42 million of those players. And so it's like, okay, there is a certain segment there that we should speak to, and we should work with, and we should build features and functionality and analytics tied to kind of that set of behaviors. But where do we really want to go, right? So there's this whole notion of, the decisions you make today allow you to operate your business in the future. And so there's this real tension that we have, and it's a healthy tension. So I don't mean tension like, oh, it's terrible. Like, there's this healthy tension we have that says, okay, we have to operate the business that we have today while looking as far forward into the future as we can. And so we straddle that line of, okay, we have gamblers and speculators in our project today, and let's build features and functionality for them. But where do we want to go? And making sure that we have infrastructure and we have foundational technologies that allow us to do that. So when we open up our user acquisition messaging and promotional plans to the core gamer audience, we bring them into a world that is comfortable to them, is familiar to them. Like, everything is native. Again, we don't speak in those DeFi or those banking terms, right?
Right.
So there's this whole journey that we go on. So when you say kind of what do you look at, and you have to understand the audience you currently have relative to the audience that you want to have. And if you know those people, the behaviors, their predilections, their tendencies, then you can build product operations and product features and, analytics that measure those things and inform those decisions.
Well, that's actually a very interesting process. Definitely. And Michael, for our last question, if there would be a dream insight you could get from your players, what would it be?
I would love it if I had the insight of how women were wired. I just don't know. I've been married for 27 years. I still don't understand my wife. I'm trying to every day. I love her to death. I work really, really hard. Stephen Hawking, before he died, said he studied every single science in the world. He still can't figure out women. So an insight on how.
And you will still not be able to do it.
If I could get that insight, that would be great. All kidding aside, look, I think that the thing that we want to know and we want to understand, the thing that we always try to work towards is, it's maybe a little bit esoteric or vague, but I think it's really important, is we operate with, there's kind of 2 big foundational principles in our company. One is we have to find a cause that is greater than ourselves, right? And for us, the cause that's greater than ourselves is player ownership of assets. Like, we think that's an unbelievable compelling cause. We think that's where gaming is going. And if we can expedite that and the things that we do that lead to that, like we want to do, that's one. But 2 is, it's all about, the most valuable commodity you have in your life is your free time. It's not how much money you have. People say, oh no, the value of my worth, the measure of my worth is how much money I have. It's actually not. It's how much, it's how do you use your free time? Now, a lot of times, how you use your free time is a reflection of your wealth. Like, as an example, Richard Branson's very wealthy. And you can say, well, how much money he has? Well, I don't know, but I'll tell you how Richard Branson spends his free time. He flies to his private island. He has a gold-plated toilet. It's on the beach. Like, that's how he spends his free time. It's a reflection of his wealth.
Definitely.
So if you understand that your free time is a limited resource, like they're not making any more of it, and you have a cap on how much you have, if you choose to spend your free time on projects that our company builds, we want to validate that. We want you to feel good about spending the most valuable commodity you have on our projects. And so we look for insights and things that inform that thinking. Is this a good use of your free time? Have we replaced, like everybody plays 2 to 3 games on a daily basis? Like if we can get into your rotation, how do we break into your rotation of daily gameplay? Oh, we do that by validating and giving you a better use of that time. So the 10 minutes you're going to play here, play with us instead. We want that to feel better. And that's how we replace and get into people's kind of, the daily fabric of their lives. And so that's really what we look at. And those are the insights that we want to try to acquire and work around. Like, are we progressing towards that goal? And if we are progressing towards that goal, we're going to keep doing those things that allow us to make that claim and believe that claim is true.
I actually love that and how you ended these podcasts, because it really does provide value to the person who's playing and owning the asset. It really shows you can do something much more than just escaping from reality like a normal game.
Yeah, it's really funny. We get into these somewhat colorful conversations in our Discord community. I always play the contrarian, because understand, I'm in a community of tens of thousands of people who are so ROI focused and so profit focused. Right. And in their minds, because again, what your perception is your reality, right? And what they believe the truth is the truth, like unassailable. And so they say, I play games for profit. I play games to make money. I play games as an investor. Like everybody thinks like I do. Well, actually they don't. Yes, they do. And you can't change their mind, right? They're like, look, again, my perception is my reality. So I said to them very simply, look, there's 3 billion gamers in the world. And last year, if you look at the financial measure of the size of the video game industry, it was like $172 billion. And those 3 billion gamers last year that spent $172 billion didn't own a single asset. So you tell me that people only want to play games for profit. I will show you $172 million that went from the players' bank accounts into the developer and publishers' bank accounts. It was a zero-sum game.
Yeah, and they didn't get anything.
They got nothing. So the vision of Wax and the mission of Wax is to help subsidize at a minimum, subsidize that player spend. And if you subsidize that player spend and you remove that stigma of, I can't quit now, I don't own anything, I'm pot committed, that's this really powerful thing. And we're going to go from 3 billion gamers to 3.5 to 4 to 5 fairly quickly, because now more people are going to come in. It's like, oh, I feel comfortable spending because I know that I have a means to let go of these assets to other people who want them.
Right. That's amazing. I think that Wax is doing an amazing thing, and I'm going to look into it more after this podcast. And Michael, I really want to thank you so much for taking the time to participate in today's podcast. It was really, really interesting to learn more about the gaming industry and Web3 and the importance of player feedback in your niche. So it was great having you.
Natalie, it was my pleasure. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
And that's it for today. Let's Talk Customer Feedback is a podcast made for player insights professionals, player feedback enthusiasts, gaming industry experts, and anything in between. The podcast is created by Afogata, the AI-driven player feedback analytics platform that cuts through the noise and brings you the player insights that move the needle. In each episode, we have a special guest from the industry, including Afogata's own customers that share their knowledge on what player feedback and the voice of the customer means for them and the companies they work at. Follow Let's Talk Customer Feedback on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you'd like to know more about Afogata and what it does, go to afogata.com and get more info on our social media, searching for Afogata on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time. Don't keep your players waiting.